Welcome to another online tutorial brought to you by the Rosewood Sioux Tribe. In this video, we're going to go through Martus and more specifically how to submit a change request, including some tips on how to make sure that the request that you're submitting is done the correct way. We're already logged into Martus. When we first log in, the screen we see is the financials report screen, depending on your level of access. You might see a report similar to this, showing you the actual expenditures up to a certain point, the expenses for the year, what the annual budget is, and how much money is remaining. So, since we're working on a change request, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to Planner and click on Change Request. It's going to take us to a screen where we can see all the items not yet approved. And if you have items that are there that has been submitted or they've been denied, if you've created drafts, they're going to sit there in this workflow so that you can attend to those and make any corrections you need, or so you can view them to see where in the approval process they'd be. But we're going to work on a change request today. So up here at the top, we want to make sure that number one, we've stayed in 2018. It's important because we might be working on a 2019 budget, and Martus will remember what year you're in. So first of all, make sure you're working in 2018. And we're going to click the blue Create New Change Request button, which takes us to the change request summary screen. Currently, we have nothing to show since we haven't started one, but this screen here will summarize the work we're doing as we begin to build our change request. At the top, we have the year 2018, the date this is created, the person that's doing the work, its current status. We have the calendar showing the fiscal year. The total at the end would show us the total amount of the changes. The net change for the budget mods. The total amount of expenses that are being increased, any that are being decreased, and what the net income change would be. We have a box to add any sort of explanation that would further give information to those reviewing our change requests so they'd understand what we're doing, and an area to attach attachments such as council resolutions, budget finance motions, whatever documents are necessary to show that you have authority to make this change. So we're going to start this by coming up next to the end of the line where the blue add button is, and I'm going to click on add. And this is going to bring up a new dialog box, or a widget as Martus calls it, and it's going to show us the checkbooks that we have access to. We can scroll through to find the one that we'd like, or we can use the boxes to make a change. And so I'm going to make a change to checkbook 35 for the finance program. I'm just easily going to click on select. And what this then takes us to is the worksheet itself, and it's going to show us the current funding sources and account numbers that have budgets. So we can see the account numbers starting on the left, and this entire area is sorted by account number, not by funding source. And on the right side, we have each funding source identified, and on the far right, the total value of the budget. Not the amount that's available to spend, but the total value of the budget. If we wanted to increase our classroom supplies line, this is the line that we would select. Takes us to the next part of the dialog box where we can begin to make changes. The majority of our budgets will always be in the month of October, or the first month of the fiscal year. The current budget is $100. The revised line is where we'd make the change. And the amount we're putting in the revised line is what we want the new total budget to be. Not how much money we're adding, not how much money we think we would have once the amount is changed and what we want to be available, but what we want to put there is what the new revised line would be. So if we were going to add $100 to this budget, we would actually take the current state plus $100 and we would be good to go from there. We can type that in there. If we're not sure what it is, we need a calculator because maybe it's more complicated numbers. On this adjustment type, we can actually change this to an additional amount and type in the additional amount here. So I typed in 100, clicked preview, and what that did was it added an additional $100 to the $100 current state budget. And that can be updated as we go along. If we didn't like that what the total was going to be, we thought it needed to be a little bit more, I can change that to 200 here, and we're going to click preview. It's now updated the revised line to 300, which is the original $100 current state budget, plus this an additional amount of $200. At the bottom, we can see the information that we're working with again, which was checkbook 35, account 69200, funding source test child 1. If we're happy at this point, we can click save. If we wanted to make a note why we're increasing that, we can do it there. So I'm not going to leave a note. I'm just going to click save. Now we're back to our change request summary sheet, and the change that we've made is summarized here. We're taking the current state of an expense of $100. We're revising that to increase the expense to $300, which is a net expense increase of $200. Our net change says $200. The majority of budget modifications we make should balance, so the net change should equal 0. So now we need to find a place where we're going to take $200 from. So I'm going to come down here to the end and I'm going to click on add. We want to go back to checkbook 35. And we're going to select that one that we want to make the modification to. If this was the result of new revenue that has come in that we've never budgeted before, that revenue line is not going to be represented yet because it hasn't been used. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to treat this as though we're budgeting revenue for the first time. Below the listing of account numbers is a box where we can select an account number. You can scroll through here with the sidebar until you find the one that you would like. If you know the number, you can type the number. If you're not sure what the number is, you can also start typing a name, and it'll start looking to match what you're typing. In this instance, I'm going to use miscellaneous income. Next option, below the funding sources, we have to select a funding source. I made the adjustment to test child 1. So in this instance, we're going to keep the funding source the same. Now that we have an account number and a funding source selected, I'm going to click add. Okay, the add dialog box is up. The current state is 0, meaning we have never budgeted the revenue. Even though the revenue may have been received, it's going to say 0 until we create a budget for it. This area doesn't tell us the amount available. It doesn't tell us the total amount of revenue received or expenses. It's telling us the current budget state, which in this case is 0. So knowing that the budget is now 0, we need to make an adjustment to match the expense adjustment we made. We can see it a little bit over here. It's still light. You can see, of course, that we increased our expenses by $200. So we're looking to match that $200 increase to expenses. So we're going to change this revised line to $200. We're going to budget $200 of the revenue we've received. So once I have that amount entered, I'm going to click Save. And now it's made that addition for us. We can see the second line that we've created, which was to checkbook 35, account 45,000 miscellaneous income, and funding source test child 1. Its current state is going from no budget to a revised line budget of $200, indicating a $200 increase. The net change is 0. Our budget change request balances. We can see the expense increase was $200. There was no decrease to expenses. So the net change between those amounts is $200, which is fine because these only are accounting for expenses, not for revenue. What we're concerned with is up here, this net change. These down here are tracking to see if we're going to make an adjustment that exceeds $10,000 to our expenses, which would then set us up for a new requirement that we have to have approval, internal approval to make changes greater than $10,000. I can make a note as to what we were doing if more explanation was needed. If this was a new budget we were creating and we had a tribal resolution or a council motion with this, we can add that attachment here as supporting documentation for the changes we're proposing. We'd always want to make sure we take one last look to verify that we have a funding source selected. This is particularly important for adding new line items. If we don't select a funding source and the budget modification goes through, you'll have to create a new one because this will not be successfully entered into Intact. So it looks like the budget is ready to go. I'm going to click Submit for approval. And now when I scroll down to the bottom to see the latest submission, I'm going to view that submission. Here's the change request I've created, and the approval flow is there. I can see who the first person is that has to approve it, the second group of approvers, our next level approvers, and the final approvers. This item hasn't been approved, so there's no indication from any of the levels indicating approval or decline. So we can look back later to see if when that changes. And of course, once it's fully approved, we'll get notification by email. Right, that'll be the end of this video. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me by email, or if you'd like to see a certain topic covered, please let me know by email. Thank you. Goodbye.